We're going to begin in a few minutes, but just maybe some elements of this building. You already know about the chapel. Our bathrooms are down there. So if you go down the hall to the right, there's men and women's. There's just a big room, so you go in either one. There's also a water fountain, and it's important to know that you gotta drink water when you're here. Okay, some people are lower elevation. You really have to drink water while you're here. And coffee doesn't help. With regards to this whole, where we are, this is a campus ministry. So right across the street, that's the University of Utah. All right, couldn't be closer unless you were on campus, which we're not allowed to be. So we're here, and the Mormons, they're right over there. So we got good traffic here, okay?
Not anymore.
Oh, they moved? Because their building was like condemned, so there's
now that's housing for students.
Oh.
But I finally found out who owns it. The Mormons, anyway. So it's another story.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
So all right.
Shell company upon shell company.
So we're really close to everything, all the activities, and Father Anselm spoke on campus at where the business school is and he had a wonderful talk there yesterday. So there's wonderful things happening here. Cade's Cafe is right down the hall here. It's a great meeting place for the students. And this building might look small when you come into it, or smaller, but no, there are 3 stories and a downstairs area, which includes a library, a really nice sized library, nice meeting spaces that are being renovated, and offices. And then students live here too. I don't know how many students live here. 15 students, okay? So this is a well-used space, well-used Newman Center. So it's very good that you can be here and see this, okay?
It may not seem like it if you visited our other ministries, but there is more heated square feet in this property than any other ministry that we have in the province other than St. Albert's. So St. Albert's is the largest, this is the second largest, with respect to square footage of heated space.
Very good.
Property-wise, it's not
Something like someone who pays the bills.
It's exactly like someone who pays the bills. Yeah.
Does this mean the heater got fixed?
Yeah. I'm sorry?
Does this mean that the heater got fixed?
Yes.
We'll find out.
Blankets.
Question mark?
So we have a wonderful space here. In the chapel, the cross up there is again the St. Catherine of Siena cross, the one that she saw when she received her stigmata. Again, the stigmata that she was given, not so that everyone can see it, but inwardly, and then it came out when she died, right? And then as you look at the chapel, you'll see Our Lady's image there, the one that St. Dominic had when he was going from monastery to monastery to reform the nuns, because the Pope asked St. Dominic to reform the nuns. Well, what else would you ask St. Dominic to do? So he's only just starting a religious order, right? So he actually started to reform the nuns by having the ones who wanted a more strict conventual life to come together. And so he had to actually get them to this new monastery. In order to do it, they said, we're not leaving without Our Lady. And they tried moving her before, then she moved back miraculously. So, so St. Dominic in the middle of the night, because people in the town or the people in Rome in that area didn't want her to move either. In procession, they went off to the new monastery and she stayed put. So the nuns stayed put too. So we have that image. And then you'll also see Bartolo Longo, and so you'll see him there in the corner, and he has the Jerusalem cross because he was a lay Dominican as well as part of the equestrian order, okay, for the Holy Sepulchre. So that's why that's one of the. So all of you who are part of the Bartolo Longo chapter. Yes, Las Vegas, okay. So you know where to go, okay? So for your private chapel. And I think also you want to talk about the
I could actually say the iconographer is a friend of mine from Oregon. The real icon will not be here for another 6 months, but she wanted us to have it in time for his feast day, which was just last week. Yeah. And so so that's a print. and she's actually willing to have other prints made. So if your chapter is interested in one, it's something that we could accomplish through her. They're very inexpensive. I mean, a brand new one, a real wood and gold leaf icon is about $2,700. Of that size. I think the print is about $500, so it's not that bad. And one of the reasons why I had a commission for our ministry is because Bartolo Longo suffered his entire life with mental health issues, and as I'm sure we're all aware, the student-aged people now, anyone born after 1995, tends to be plagued with mental health issues more than the previous generations. And so as an adjunct aspect of our ministry, since our job is to care for the community of the University of Utah, that we can pray for the mental health of the students. And I assume also the professors, because if the students are having mental health problems, I'm sure the professors are also having mental health problems. And as a result, a causal relationship. And so we can pray for the students, we can pray for the community of the university, for to Bartolo Longo, for better mental health. And as you know, as I'm sure many of you know, that he had really strong suicidal ideation, right? And suicide is really on the rise among the student populations at the various universities. So I'm asking the parish, I've asked everybody to seek the intercession of Blessed Bartolo Longo for the health and safety of our university population.
Yeah.
Also, occult activity is up, majorly up. It's almost like we're in the 1980s again, with like crystals and tarots and all this sort of stuff. And as you know, Bartolo Longo was a priest of Satan before he had his conversion or his reversion to the faith. And so he's also wanted to seek for intercession against occult practices. So, yeah.
All right. So with
Speaking of occult practices.
so we have Father Anselm
Yes.
here.
Oh. I thought I mentioned that one of our members from Salt Lake, Robert Yemchek, who's a physician at the University Hospital, is today in Rome praying for all of us, and for the friars, and for our success today at this event, at the tomb of St. Catherine.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. He pointed out that of course it's just her body and not her head.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you might know the story that when the Holy Father wanted her body moved to Rome, he said, "Except her head. That head has caused too many problems here already."
All right, so Father Anselm is here. Father Anselm Ramelow is a professor at our Dominican School of Philosophy and Theology, and he is a professor in philosophy. So we are very happy to have him here. And so let us welcome Father Anselm.
In fact, for the first part of the talk, I would profit from some light. Is that, can we turn those back on?
Oh, yes, yes, yes.
Okay.
And then let me know with the video because I'll turn them off.
Right. Thank you.
Yes.
Of course, my notes are very small and my eyesight doesn't get better. So I was told you're interested in AI and in art, and there's a way of putting the two topics together. I've been doing that myself for a while, talking about AI as well as art. And the way to put that together is, of course, to look at how AI also makes art and what to think about that. There's some very astounding kind of things people show you, and perhaps to understand what's going on exactly there, but also what's behind that and how we should evaluate that. But before we talk about AI and art, let's talk about God, right? Because art has to do with creativity. And who is the first and all creator of all? That's God, right? God is the creator. So in some way, we could take him as the paradigm, the prime case for creativity and making of things.
Father,
Yeah.
can I interrupt you real quick? I'm sorry.
Can everyone hear? No, let me, I have a microphone that will attach. Give me 1 second.
And while we're waiting, there's pieces of paper stickers, so you can write your name down if you like.
Test.
Can you hear better with that?
Can you hear me now? So, I said, let's talk about God, because God is a creator, right? And so we talk about artistic creativity, that is sort of a paradigm to look at, and the prime paradigm, if you want. So God is what we call a creator. We share that with Jews and Muslims, and we are monotheists, and we think that all of reality comes from God. And in creating, God is inventive. He does something new. He didn't have to create. He does something fresh and original, if you want. And among those things, and perhaps also to say, unlike human artists, he doesn't have anything that he imitates. So if you go and paint a sunset, you look at an already existing sunset out in nature. When God creates, there's nothing for him to look at except himself. So in creating, God imitates himself. That is, everything that he creates is an expression of who he is. It imitates his nature, and it imitates his very own beauty. Beauty is actually one of the qualities of God. God is good, God is wise, God is truth itself, God is life, he is being, but he's also beauty itself. And so God, in imitating his very own beauty, creates a beautiful creation. And among those things that he creates is us. So he makes us. God is a maker, and he makes us, we say, in his image and likeness. If you think through, God is a maker, and he makes us in his image and likeness. That makes he makes other makers, right? We are makers, and in that sense we are in his image and likeness because he also is a maker. And that is across the board. This is not just for art, it's also technology. So the artificial intelligence that we create is in some way also a way in which we imitate our maker, because we are making things ourselves. But art is, of course, a very special case. And by the way, I think you can think through for yourself and think of counterexamples perhaps, but I think there are really two things only that we make: tools and artworks. And you can think about other counterexamples to that, but I think these are the two great groups that we make. And so when God can make beings that make other things, God is a maker who can make makers. Now here's the question: we are in the image and likeness of God. Can we also make makers? Can I make, for example, a machine that is genuinely creative, like an artist? So God can make somebody who has genuinely new ideas, inspiration like an artist. Can we make computers that make something also with a genuine inspiration, as a genuine kind of creator also? Or does our imitation of God does not go that far? Would these machines then indeed reflect God's own creativity as ours would? Do these machines have copyright on their products in the way that we do? Or are they perhaps just like animals that just procreate and have always make the same kind of animal yet again and again and again, so there wouldn't be any new thing to come under the sun? Now, in some way, we think of machines increasingly as being on their own, being autonomous, as we say, self-driving cars. Yes, there are now self-driving taxis in San Francisco, all over the place actually. And we talk about autonomous weapons in warfare that make their own decisions to kill. It's a great ethical problem actually. But what does autonomy mean? Is that the same as creativity? That we have to ask ourselves, what is artistic creativity? And I want to suggest that artistic creativity is not just one thing, it is many things. It is a whole process, the beginning, a middle, and an end. And so what I'm going to do now is to go through this process and look at what could be the same or not in machines in artificial intelligence. And when I'm done with all of that, I'm also going to show you some examples of that. For us, making the work of art begins with appreciation. We want to make something because we appreciate the beauty of something. Sometimes we're also just stimulated by seeing somebody else having made something, oh, I want to do something myself too. But it is a kind of an appreciation in any case. And masterpieces will inspire us to emulate what has been done and perhaps to exceed them or do something different. And appreciation, though, is not something we expect to be in a computer. Right? I mean, a computer doesn't appreciate anything because appreciation is an experience. Do computers experience anything? And I talked yesterday at the university about whether they have experience or not. I'm not going to repeat this right now, but the experience is an inner subjective state. It's a way, it feels in the way that it is to look at a sunset, for example, and then wanting to paint it. Alan Turing, you may have heard that name perhaps, the one who invented the Turing test, writes in that very same paper in which he proposes the Turing test that we still have the intuitions that computers cannot do certain things. I quoted that yesterday too. And so he says, computers cannot be kind, resourceful, beautiful, friendly, have initiative, have a sense of humor, tell right from wrong, make mistakes, fall in love, enjoy strawberries and cream, make somebody fall in love with it, learn from experience, use words properly, be the subject of its own thought, have as much diversity of behavior as a man, do something really new. Now you can take each item on that list and argue about that. Some of that we probably would say today they can do that. But there are other things I think that are still true. And the very last item is to do something really new. In some way that's what we expect from an artist. You don't just copy something, you do something new. And but there are other things too. I mean, if you appreciate the beauty or the goodness of something like strawberry and cream, as he mentions here, that is this kind of inner experience. If you have that taste, you might want to be cooked perhaps, to do something nice too of that sort. And so computers don't have that kind of appreciation. That is not where the productivity comes from. And so computers don't computers don't write love poetry, for example, on their own initiative because they don't fall in love. Chunks of matter don't fall in love with other chunks of matter. It's not part of what matter is. They also don't paint sunsets on their own initiative because they don't appreciate them. So appreciation is sort of the initial, the ignition, so to speak, for the process. Even in ourselves, if I look at the sunset that I appreciate, and somebody would look at the same time at my brain, nobody would see a sunset in my brain, right? The brain is a material thing. And material things don't have experience, and there's nothing like it in the brain that looks like that experience. It is in our mind, and our mind is not the same thing as the brain. Computers, though, are only matter, only an equivalent to brains and silicon, but there's nowhere any kind of appreciation to be found. So that is already a very fundamental difference between us and computers in their starting point. In appreciating something, we may get then, that's the second point, ourselves a creative idea. I may not just copy the sunset, I may invent another sunset, perhaps. Or whatever else comes to my mind is a creative, intuitive idea that I get and that I then pursue and try to realize out in a material thing. Clay or paint, canvas, or in tones and words. And that idea precedes the actual making. So you have the idea first, and then you make it. Apparently Mozart had whole symphonies in his head before he actually wrote them down. So you can have a creative idea, and it precedes then the execution of that idea. Again, none of that is to be found in material states of a computer, nor in your brain. I mean, if you look at Mozart's brain, you find no symphony there, right? There may be, the brain may be firing and doing all sorts of things, but nothing like that looks like a symphony or sounds like a symphony. There's no music coming from the brain or something like that. So that is in the mind and not in the matter, and computers are only matter. And so nobody has any piece of music or poem in mind that is then, would that be written down or printed out from a computer? So where are these ideas? Also, some of these ideas can be realized manifoldly, if you want. So I mean, you can print the same poem over and over again. You can play the same piece of music over and over again. You can take Beethoven's Ninth Symphony and there are many different performances. Which one of these is the symphony? In some way, it is none of these. Because if it is one of these, it cannot be the other ones, or it would be distinct from each other, or you get into all sorts of logical kind of problems that way. The idea must be something independent from all these material realizations in sound and musical instruments and so forth and so on. Or the idea of a poem, which print is it? In some ways, it's none of them. It is an idea that is something in the mind, it's something spiritual. Right? Again, if that is so, where would that kind of idea be in a machine? All that you have are silicon, little microchips and silicon and everything else in there. But these are material things, none of which looks like an idea. And so that also a computer doesn't have. You can program the computer to spit out a certain kind of thing, but that is just another kind of material state that is not the same as having an idea. All that you have in a computer, again, are material states. Material states cannot be expressed in matter because they are already material. So it's not like you having a spiritual idea and then say, I'm going to put this into matter. I have the idea of a sculpture and then I carve it into the clay or the stone or the marble or whatever it is. If it is already material, then it already is a sculpture. Right? Then there's no way in which that can be further expressed. It is already the expression. So again, you have to have the distinction between mind and matter, between something spiritual and a material kind of thing, to understand what a creative idea is that then becomes realized by an artist. The next step is, so you have the idea now, you've appreciated something, you get an idea, then you have to choose to make that thing. That's not self-understood, we sometimes forget that. Can you make a work of art involuntarily? No, cannot. You can also not make it unconsciously. I mean, for one, if you make a choice, you have to know what you're choosing. You have to make an informed choice, right? So you have to be conscious to choose. But there is, you have to use your free will to make art. And that is an important thing. We can forget that because that's not itself something you immediately see, but nevertheless, it is something that's implied in the fact that we hold people accountable for making something. The choice is not just between making this or that or the other thing, it is also between making something and not making anything at all. You could just leave it alone. Say, no, I'm not going to make something. And sometimes we should. If our ideas are bad, or say, blasphemous or pornographic or something like that, we probably should not choose it, or choose not to do it. And we are held accountable if we do it anyway. And we are held accountable, say, for hate speech or whatever else is going to be punished. And so we are responsible for our products because they are based on a free choice. Now again, nothing of that sort would exist in a computer. A computer doesn't make choices. A computer is a material kind of conglomerate, and whatever happens, it has material causes that causes the next state of the computer and so forth. And you don't need anything else to explain what is happening there. It just happens on a material basis, and no free will is involved. Now, people do realize that, and so for one, here's an objection. You could say, well, don't some artists are also making things unconsciously and automatically and so forth? For example, the surrealists, the surrealists from the beginning of the 20th century, they made all these kind of weird paintings. Salvador Dali, maybe you know that painter, but some of them engaged in the practice of automatic writing. Father Gabriel just talked about, esoteric and occult practices, don't do it. But they did that, so they wanted as a source of inspiration, something else is supposed to take you over and so forth. And you know what you're doing, it's whatever is doing it to you. So it's a bad idea to begin with, but it's also, you have to step back far enough to see what's actually happening. It's not that they don't make a choice. They make a choice to enter that process. Right? And they are still responsible for entering that process. And again, I say, don't do it. Right? It's another one of the things you should know, I'm choosing not to do it. Right? But the whole process is still governed by that kind of choice. And a little bit of that happens also in artistic processes. So a painter may not consciously put every brush stroke where it is. You have a skill in your hand. The hand is going to do something. You have trained your hand. That's itself part of your choice, to train yourself to become a painter. Your hand, Gilson, the Thomas thing, says that people underestimate the intelligence of the hands of an artist. They have gained that kind of intelligence by the training that you consciously chose to develop by painting. But once you have that, you don't have to think about every little move that you make. Or if you're a pianist, right, you have developed the skill of playing the piano. If you're trying to think of where you put your finger every time, right, you probably don't play very well, right? And you get it usually wrong. Your fingers will do their own thing. But it's still you consciously have chosen to develop that skill, and it's also not that you're playing the piano involuntarily. That's still a voluntary act. So we make arts by choice, voluntarily, even if not everything is controlled by an individual particular kind of choice. Now there are people working with AI, and I will show you an example later from music, who say, well, okay, but we can do that too with our machines. We just put a random generator into the machine. So you have certain patterns that you can reproduce, but you don't just reproduce this. If you want to do something really new, you just have some random input. And so, and that has various applications. But first of all, for the sake, for the question of voluntary choices and voluntary making, something random is not the same as a conscious choice. We don't think of our conscious choices as flipping a coin. We have reasons for our choices. Flipping a coin is still like automatic writing. So a random generator plug into a computer or something like that is not the same as the choice, the conscious choice to make something and make it new if you want. They will be all part of the material universe with its causalities. There's no freedom in that. The random generator also has causes. They're just unrelated causes, but they're still causes. And so even if you flip a coin, there are causes for why the coin is landing in the way it does. It's not that the laws of nature suddenly suspended. But if you make a true free choice, that is independent from the laws of nature. It's very different. So again, nothing in a computer can do something like that. So what we have now is appreciation, creative ideas, and then the choice to make something. And none of that seems to exist in a computer. And now I just talked about, the newness and originality that must be there as well. And an artist will develop original designs that you haven't seen before. Not all artists do that, but the great artists do. And they form a whole new school of making certain things that emulate what they have done, the great masterpieces. But there are original designs. Now, computers have to work with pre-existing designs. So people feed into these computers all sorts of artworks as a basis. It's the databases, and then you have these neural networks that do machine learning on that and recognize patterns. And these patterns then can be used to generate similar kind of things, or the same kind of pattern. Right? And an interesting point to that is, where do you take the patterns from? You take them from already existing works of art. Has anybody ever thought of paying the real artists for the data that these machines are using? That's actually an ethical problem. It's not just for art, it's also for other things. This machine learning has to use already real work that others have been doing, and it's parasitic on that. And I never pay for that. And there is something really wrong about that too. But having taken that, so you have the patterns, and then the question is, as I said, an artist may do something new with these patterns. How does a machine do that? Again, people will talk about this random generators that switch around something that made them look new, but is that really a really new insight, or just mixing up the old patterns? Now, mediocre artists have always done things like that. Right? So they have never had original ideas. They may be disciples of the great masters and reproduce something. And there's a place for that, that's all right. But we also wouldn't rate that as a great work of art. It's a great artistic achievement. And my question is here then in this sense more, is that what computers can do? And can indeed this random generators be the same thing as an original new insight? Again, you can make some objections here and say, well, isn't that true for us too? In our processes too, there are random features. For example, to take another 20th century artist, Jackson Pollock. If you've heard of Jackson Pollock. So he's the one who was laying the canvas flat on the ground and took the paint with the brush and let the paint drip from the brush on the canvas. You get kind of splatter all over if you want. And of course, unlike using the brush directly on the canvas, you cannot control whether the paint is going to land, right? And so you get random features coming out of that. So you can say, well, can an artist not use that? And yes, I would say yes, he can. And but Jackson Pollock then also saw what is happening and reacted to it, right? So he was still involved in the conscious, in the process, and having insight based on the process and reacting to it, and the outcome is based on that. And with the examples I'm going to show you later, this is actually still true for AI too. They're not doing things as autonomously as people usually think. So that is not necessarily an objection. Randomness can be involved, but randomness does not replace true creativity. That depends on a real, genuine insight. What you have is perhaps more like random features in nature. So for example, you can have rain carving a face into or some other features into a rock surface. Right? Did the rain intend to make a picture of someone? Like, no, Mount Rushmore or something like that? No. It happens accidentally without anybody ever intending something. Now, in some way, that's what a computer does too. You have material processes, I mean, rain and rock, it's just matter, right? And they interact somehow and they produce something as a random outcome. But there's no mind there, there's no intention there, nobody means to do anything. And similarly, in a computer, you have physical processes with some random features, and they may accidentally produce something that looks pretty nice. Say. You know, and some of these artworks can look nice. But nobody ever intended anything. Right? Nobody had a creative insight to bring that about. It is a freak of nature in some way. And you can tweak that perhaps to make it more likely that these freaks of nature happen. But again, this is not the same as what we think of as an artistic process. Again, you can make another objection. What about in us? What about our new insights and our original kind of ideas? Aren't we affected all the time by all sorts of random things that come from our environment? I mean, for one, we have seen other forms of artwork, but also I may be affected by what I have had for breakfast before I went to my canvas to paint something, right? Or by who I randomly ran into on the street on the way to my workshop or something like that, and I had a stimulating conversation or something that made me angry or something like that, and that will resonate in my artwork too. Or a newspaper article that I read over breakfast. None of that is our choice. Some of that we might not even be consciously aware of. So how is that different? Well, I think it's true that we are affected by all of these things, but that is not the whole of what we call artistic inspiration. All of these things need to arrive somewhere. I have to perceive them consciously or unconsciously in some way. I have to arrive in my mind, in other words. That kind of point of arrival that doesn't exist in a machine. There's no mind to recognize all of these things or be affected by all of these things. But I become aware of that and then reflect on it and then react to it. And that is where the true artistic inspiration comes in. So there are random features, but they are just preconditions. They are not the whole story. They are not a sufficient condition for what we call artistic inspiration. That comes in with our response to all of that. And in that response, we somehow transcend what is given, including other artworks we have seen. There's a space that opens up for something really new and original. And that, again, is not random anymore. That has to do with our mind that has a genuine insight and that can reflect on these. As I just said, we can reflect on these things. That's another kind of feature that comes from our mind. Computers cannot reflect on themselves. Computers cannot know themselves or say I to themselves. You can program them to make the noises that go with that, but they have no self-consciousness. Now, if I am an artist, and I have learned all of these kind of skills and how to put my fingers or how to use the brush and things like that, I may be pretty set in my ways. And a computer that has learned a certain kind of pattern that it will reproduce also is set in its ways. But unlike the computer, I can reflect on that. And I can decide I want to do something new, I want to change something about that. But a computer has an algorithm by which it does that, and it cannot come to reflect on this algorithm and say, I want to change my algorithm by which I do all of that, right? That's like if you had a thermostat that changes its own setting by its own volition, if you want. You cannot do that, You determine the setting, not the machine. And so a machine cannot go beyond itself by reflecting itself, having new insights and so forth, and opening up new vistas, if you want. So this is the kind of newness and originality that we also expect them in a genuine artistic process. We also then have to go to work, using our hands and other things to produce the work. And that has to do with the execution of the insights that we have had so far. And I think there are also differences in the way in which we do that. That is, we have to have, if I use my hand with a brush, as an extension of that, that is different from computer printing out a poem or a picture or whatever it is. My hand itself is imbued by my mind, if you want. Right? We experience things not just in our brain, but in our whole body. If I touch something, or touch my brush, or something with the brush, that the touch makes my fingers out here, not in my brain. Right? And my whole body is alive. And I take this living body, and through this body I then start to create and craft things out in the world. And I think that there are other kind of things that happen that wouldn't happen in a computer. There are living features in work that come from my intelligent body, if you want, that through which I work, and that has a life of its own sometimes too. It's not a mechanical process, in other words. So that's the execution, and then at a certain point we say, now I'm done. Right? Now the picture is finished. Somebody has said, we know that the picture is finished when we become a spectator of our own work, when we become our own audience. Right? You suddenly start to look at it, and you're not the maker anymore, but you look at it, oh, I have made that, and it's done now, it's finished. But that is actually not self-understood. So how do we know that we are finished? There are apparently apes that paint pictures. And I didn't bring an example of that. I usually fool my students by showing them and say, that's abstract expressionism. That's how it looks like. So that's paint all over the place. There was a painting chimp with the name of Congo in the 1950s, and they made a lot of money from him. It was auctioned off and things like that. But what we know from apes is they just work on the sheer joy of disrupting things. They enjoy that, doing that. Right? As you cast, paint on the canvas and so forth. But if the experimenter doesn't at a certain point take away the canvas, it will just keep doing that until it's all one blob of paint. Right? That's not how we finish our artworks. Right? We know at a certain point that it is finished. We don't just keep going and throw more paint on it. That's not the point either. The point is to match the creative idea that you have already, which I mentioned earlier. Right? So we have a preconception of what it is supposed to be, and when the whole is completed. And that's why we know when we have arrived at what we intend to execute. Right? And then we stop, and we become the spectator of our own work. So even animals, who I would claim are much more than any computer, because they're really alive, they really have minds. So even animals cannot do that. Even less should we assume that a machine can do that. So machines will stop, but it's only because we have stopped them, or we have programmed them to stop at a certain point, or they run out of paper, or out of power. These are totally unrelated kind of reasons for why they stop. It's not because they have come to see that a preconceived idea is now realized, because they don't have a preconceived idea. Right? All that they have is the algorithm that they are working with. And so only a mind can compare an idea to its external realization. Two material things cannot be correlated in that way. And then, when we have completed that, I said we become our own spectators in a way, and then we are back to appreciation, the thing with which we started. So we appreciate what we have made. And appreciation, again, is a way of taking in the whole, appreciating how the parts relate to the whole, for example, the beauty that comes from that, the harmony or proportion. But for that, you have to be able to actually see that kind of a whole. And again, I would suggest that nothing like that could exist in a computer. Computers don't understand what a sentence is either. They understand patterns of words, but not a sentence. They don't understand what a melody is, for example. A melody, it takes really a mind to perceive a melody. You mentioned that yesterday too. So in a melody, if you look at an individual note and you cut off all the rest, you will not hear the same note even. The note is affected by what comes before it and what we expect to come afterwards. What we hold in our memory and what our expectation, things where the melody is now going as the next note, the next step that's going to take. Which is why we sometimes can be surprised because we didn't expect it to go that way. You know? But we are looking at that in a larger kind of field of consciousness with a beginning and an end, but extended in time. A note sounds different depending on where it is related to the base note of a melody and so forth and so on, or what interval comes before or after. And so that is a kind of a holistic feature of hearing and of appreciating things. Nothing of that wholeness exists in a material object. You just have one part after another, one microchip after another. There is nothing that shows of that sort. There is no appreciation of that sort in a machine. And that is why we don't read our poems and novels to a computer for evaluation. We don't expect them to appreciate it in the way that we want it. We do that with human audiences. If you ever told your computer a joke, why not, you know? And neither do they tell jokes to each other. And they're also actually, by the way, not very good at telling jokes. If you tell ChatGPT, it'll come up with a joke. But that's a different point. But the appreciation, I mean, we don't think that there is a there, and rightly so. The appreciation doesn't happen in the machine. We may give our poems and novels to a computer for spell check. That's different from appreciation, from artistic appreciation. That they can do, but that's a very different story. And so there are a lot of things that are different and but they don't expect in a machine. And we would not apologize to a machine if we destroy accidentally their artwork. Right? Because again, we don't think that it's somebody that was meant to do anything in the first place. We do not honor their copyright, as we should with the artists from which they take their data sets. And we don't put them on trial for pornographic art, blasphemy, or hate crimes for the very same reason. They didn't choose to do anything, they didn't mean anything. We may do that with the makers of the machines, but the machines themselves are not true makers. Right? So here we are back to the starting point. Can we make makers? Can we create creators in the way that God does? And Alan Turing, who I quoted earlier, so the Turing test, says, well, why not? You know what? Maybe it is our task to create this. He says the mansions, so computer mansions, in which God can then infuse a soul. Right? Well, first of all, if that were a good idea, I mean, if you look at the history of literature that looks at these things like Frankenstein's monster and the golem and other kind of things, that usually doesn't turn out well. God is not pleased by these attempts, you know. And so I think that's one thing to consider. But the other thing is, God already gave us a method to make makers, to create creators. But it isn't really making or creating, it is procreating. By begetting other human beings, we beget other creators. We don't beget our machines, but we beget other human beings. That is where God puts in the soul, infuses the soul. These are the true mansions that God has prepared or that we can make in that way. And so we cannot make, but we can beget other makers. And that, interestingly, is, for one, indeed something that we do expect also in an artistic process. As I said, we begin with appreciation, begin with beauty. And Plato points out, all begetting also begins with being enticed by beauty. Right? So that gets us going, if you want, for that process. That's the form of inspiration, both in the making of art, but also in begetting. There are parallels, but there are also differences. And if you come to think of it, every making is preceded by begetting. Every creation is preceded by procreation. That is true even with God. Now I come back to God. Because it's the procreation in God. We call God a Father, and God has a Son who is also God, an eternal like Him. It's the second person of the Trinity. And we call Him the Divine Word, the Divine Logos. Right? It's a divine concept. We talk about ourselves conceiving ideas, right? But conceiving is procreation, right? So God conceives a Son, and it's a concept, and that's something like the creative idea that I mentioned earlier, because it is through the Son, through His Word, that God creates the world. God conceives an artistic idea, if you want, and then proceeds to enact that idea, puts it, realizes it in the making of the universe. Right? So there is a parallel between us and God in that as well. But our procreation does not extend to our machines. So we cannot make other kind of creators, but we can also not make machines that themselves procreate. It's a similar kind of thing. And there is a passage in the Book of Wisdom where strangely Scripture anticipates something like that. It's in the context of creating idols. And you have to bear with me, I was trying to find this passage here.
Is this Psalm 94?
No, it's the Book of Wisdom, chapter 15. Yeah. So that's chapter 15, beginning verse 15 actually. I'll just begin right there. It's not directly coming to the point immediately. So, for they esteemed all the idols of the nations as gods, which cannot use their eyes to see, nor nostrils to breathe the air, nor ears to hear, nor fingers on their hands for feeling. Even their feet are useless to walk with them. So they're blind and dumb and deaf. They don't have experiences. They're like computers. They cannot appreciate anything, right? They don't have experiences in that way. Continuing now, for it was a mere human being who made them. We cannot make other beings that have experiences. We can procreate them, but we cannot make them. Our machines don't have experiences. But here's the reason. Again, for it was a mere human being who made them, one living on borrowed breath who fashioned them. For no one is able to fashion a God like himself. He is mortal, and what he makes with lawless hands is dead. For he is better than the things he worships. He at least lives, but never as idols. We are more than machines, right? But in the making, sort of, it's a downgrading kind of process, right? You can always make lesser things than yourself, but not equal things. Even God doesn't make anything equal to himself. God cannot make another God. If he does that, he begets a son, right? That's the way in which he multiplies himself, but that's not another God, that's still himself. We cannot make beings like ourselves except by begetting. What we make will be lower, and it will not be alive in the way that God can make us alive, because we live on borrowed breath, it says here. So, when Adam was made, God took clay, matter, material things, inanimate things, all experience and so forth, and he breathes his own breath into that clay, and that makes Adam in the image and likeness of God. That breath comes from God, but we have it borrowed from God. It is not for us to take it and make something else with it. We cannot take that same breath and infuse it into AI, in a machine. The machine will not have these kind of conscious states, experiences, or creativity that goes with that. So there we are back with God. Now what I want to do now is just to show you just a few little examples of what people have made with AI.
Let me get the slide.
Yeah. And now I have to deal with technology, and technology tends to hate me, but pray for me.
You're dissing it with the AI.
Yes, AI is listening.
It's listening or in front of a computer, that's the first step. No, there's weird stuff, there's a lot of story.
Here, I'll block the light there at least. And I have to admit I won't be much help. So if someone else really does know computers,
So we're going to
bring out your talents right now.
Be activated somehow.
I was the video who did that.
So it's a little hard to see, but I think you get the idea, right? So this is a painting that was made by AI. It's called Edmond de Bellamy. Was made in 2018 by a Paris-based arts collective called Obvious. And used a data set of 15,000 portraits painted between the 14th and the 20th century to mix all sorts of patterns. That was sort of the training database. And then generated this image. Now, I think there are probably other things that also happen, which they didn't tell me here, but I will show that in other works, but I know that for sure. But this work was auctioned off by Christie's. It was initially valued at $7,000 to $10,000, and was instead selling for $432,500. So that's, I said, we don't honor the copyright of AI, but of course the AI didn't get that money. It was the creators of the AI, and yes, they are the true creators, right? And one can admire the creativity of technicians and engineers who make these machines. But it's not the machine itself that we admire, I think, but the people who build machines like that. Next here. So that's an example of how it does that. So we have the machine with a technical kind of printing device putting the paint on the canvas. Just as that, it's different from a human making a human arm, the tool that is our body, if you want, the conjoined tool is imbued with our own life and intentionality. It's not just a mechanical arm here. But they can do, interesting things. That just to show that. Some of them turn out interesting, at least, some of this works better with modern art because it's already sort of patterns and patches in many ways. But they're also very realistic kind of forms of artworks.
I assume they're programming, like in this case, to be abstract or something, and the other one to make a portrait. I mean, it's not
Yeah, so you can do that too. But the latest is you can put in text.
What was the question?
Can you say your question again?
Well, I'm wondering, are they giving, saying, hey, do cubism, or do
You
a
can.
17th century portrait?
Yes, you can.
Because I mean, these aren't two just random events that you showed us. I mean, there must have been some other.
There's all sorts of, first of all, the database on which they train these things, that based on which they have particular kind of patterns that they will use. And you can label them and identify them. This is, say, Cubism, this is from the 17th century, and so on. Because, I mean, so now you can type in text, you know, paint me X, Y, or Z, and the text will then be correlated to a statistical distribution of pixels on a square or something like that. It's not like the computer understands if you say paint me a kangaroo, what a kangaroo is, you know, but it doesn't know that the word kangaroo is correlated with a certain statistical likelihood of certain pixels being in certain places. It's pretty mind-numbing to think, oh, how many pixels you must have and how much